This just in out of college hoops, where Auburn is still the #1 team in the country. They are #1 of the AP poll for the 4th straight week. The Tigers received all 62 votes for the 3rd straight week after taking down LSU on Wednesday and number 25 Ole Miss on Saturday. Next up for Auburn, they have a home test on Tuesday against Oklahoma. And getting a look at the top 10, one of the biggest fallers here, Iowa State. They are down 5 spots after they lost over the weekend. Florida down 1 spot after losing to Tennessee. Tennessee then goes up 4 spots to #4. Then we have Bama at #3, Duke at #2, and again, Auburn remains the #1 team in the AP Top 25 for the 4th straight week. So let's talk about it and what it means in terms of the bracketology implications, storylines, all the things. And for that, we have our guys Matt Norlander and Jerry Palm. So a lot of L's that we saw. 6 of the top 11 teams lost over the weekend, over the past couple of days. Iowa State losing to K-State. My Florida Gators, I had to watch them lose by 20 to Tennessee. Kentucky shockingly taking an L to Arkansas. So Jerry, I'll start with you here. Walk us through what the implications are of all of these losses right there in the top 10, top 11 in terms of the seeding and bracketology in your eyes.
Yeah, so the top 16 teams of my bracket on Friday, 9 of them lost. And so, and the top three teams won, the top 3 #1 seeds won, but 9 of the other 13 lost. So there was quite a bit of jumbling around. Michigan State and Kentucky fell down from the 2 line. Tennessee went all the way from a 3 seed to the 4th #1. All of the 2 seeds lost from my Friday bracket. So there was that part of the bracket did a lot of shuffling. There are still 7 SEC teams among the top 16. Purdue moved up. Texas A&M moved up to a 2, while as Michigan State and Kentucky fell down. But, you know, most of the shuffling is within a tight range in the bracket. You don't see a lot of 2-line moves, except for Tennessee going all the way from a 3 seed to a #1. The SEC now has 3 #1 seeds in my bracket.
Yeah, you know what was right on that note, Jerry. I thought Tennessee winning the way that it did and knocking off Florida in the process. One, it avenges the loss. Those 2 teams have met twice this season. The combined margin of victory/defeat in those 2 games is 50 points. So I really want to see them meet again in the SEC tournament just to see what happens when they're on a neutral floor. We talk about a lot of those losses, and Florida, you know, really getting rolled and having statistically its worst shooting performance in recorded history. Back to 38-39. Florida had never shot worse in a game. Sorry, Jacqueline, had never shot worse in a game than it did on Saturday in Knoxville. But I thought the Tennessee win was pretty intriguing. Jerry just said he bumped it up from the 3 line to the 1 line, and to me it reinforced the Vols. I've maintained this for the past few weeks here, and you know they've had some up and downs, but I've maintained that Tennessee really is a true national championship contender and on the same tier of Auburn, Alabama, Florida, and what have you in the SEC. And then real quick, I just want to give a quick bump to Arizona, which was able to avoid what would have been like, you know, a really annoying loss against a subpar Arizona State team. That's a team that was preseason top 10, started 4-5, and now it's 11-1 in its past 12. And you can see witness to this in Jerry's bracket, but it is creeping back more into that territory we have been familiar with, not just Arizona historically, but under Tommy Lloyd, that has been a top 2 seed since he got there.
Okay, Iowa State lost by like almost 20, and that was a full drag of only my Florida Gators. So I have to, you know, try and shift the focus here. I'm not going to lie that I was trying to petition for Florida to be on the 1 line with Jerry prior to the game, and so we were saying, hey, just go beat Tennessee by 30 again, and you'll be on the 1 line. And obviously that did not happen. Speaking of Iowa State, they have a big matchup, a Big 12 matchup here with Kansas. As we mentioned, they're coming off of a loss. Both teams are coming off of a loss here. Matt, what's your gut telling you about who wants it more and who's going to bounce back in this matchup?
Oh, boy, I don't know who wants it more. I do think Iowa State's players got caught looking ahead a little bit. That loss to Kansas State was among the more shocking scores we've seen in the sport this season. Meantime, I dedicated a column on Saturday night at CBSSports.com about Kansas because I actually thought Kansas losing was maybe the most meaningful result, big picture, that we had on a very noisy weekend in college hoops. Kansas is now really flirting with something that it hasn't experienced as a program in more than 4 decades, and that is consecutive seasons wherein it would finish outside the top 3 in its conference standings. We're so used to Kansas winning the Big 12 almost every single year, and even in years when it didn't do that, it would be number 2. And now this has hit a lull point here. Jacqueline, I think tonight Kansas is going to be up and ready and good to go and have a well-executed game plan here. The question becomes, how does Flory Badunga, how is he used by Bill Self? There's been some inconsistencies with KJ Adams, with DeJuan Harris Jr., who's their key point guard and who's a fifth-year senior, but they have not been as consistent as need be. That said, Iowa State has hit also its worst point of the season. This game is between two teams that are going to easily make it into the NCAA tournament. But for Iowa State, you know, if you want to remain in that one seed conversation, Jerry and I talked about this Saturday night on HQ. You might need to go and win this game on the road. It's not going to be easy. For Kansas, if you want to avoid having a repeat of last year when you were fighting, you know, be on the 4 line and try and get into the second weekend, which it didn't do, you can't drop this one either. It's a pretty urgent game, as urgent as it could be for two teams safely in the tournament. You asked for my lean. I will say Kansas gets it done in that famous building tonight.
Yeah, Iowa State, really the Kansas State loss hurts, not just because they lost to a relatively mediocre team badly at home, but, you know, it got caught between an Arizona loss, which was a miracle loss for Iowa State, and now you've got to go to Kansas. But Kansas isn't really Kansas either. As Matt just pointed out, they haven't even really dominated the home floor. I mean, they already lost to Houston, but they also lost to West Virginia, probably should have lost to UCF. So on their home floor this year, Kansas hasn't really been up to the standard that Kansas is. So I guess that's a glimmer of hope for Iowa State. But both of these teams are desperate. Nobody's going to play themselves out of the NCAA tournament here. But you're probably, especially if you're Iowa State, playing yourself out of contention for a #1 seed if you can't get this win in a very difficult environment to get wins.
Yeah, and Jerry, the last time that we spoke, Iowa State, to your point, they were on the 1 line, so certainly a lot for them to consider. Let's go to the Big Ten, because USC, they get a win over Michigan. Now they are part of the first 4 out group of teams, according to Jerry. They're middle of the pack when it comes to the Big Ten. Jerry, when you look at the rest of the schedule, because they have Purdue, one on Friday, and then Oregon later in March, what do they have to do to get out of the first 4 out and be in the first 4 in? How high is their ceiling based off of the schedule?
Yeah, I mean, for USC, I mean, they've been kind of flying under the radar, mostly because they haven't won enough to get into the radar. But they won at Illinois, and now they've beaten Michigan State. They're going to be at Purdue this week. They're also at Northwestern before that. But they're going to have several games down the stretch of this season where NCAA tournament teams, home or road, you have to win these games. So USC, if they can take care of their business and then try and strike gold when you get the chances like at Purdue, then, you know, great, you know, get those wins. They've already got a couple of those wins. What they need to do is make sure they don't give them away by losing games to teams, home or away, that NCAA tournament teams should beat.
And Matt, another conversation here about the Big Ten, because we keep talking about the SEC and how strong that conference is in terms of, you know, what we're seeing. But looking at Big Ten teams that are in the bracket, according to Jerry's bracketology here, there's 9 of them that are in the Big Ten. So are we maybe sleeping on the Big Ten a little bit, in your opinion, because all of the attention has been on the SEC in terms of college hoops?
Maybe a little bit, but not totally. I mean, the SEC could have 12 of its 16 teams make the NCAA tournament, and the Big Ten could have 9 of its 18, so that's a 75 to 50% difference. The SEC is rightfully beginning enough love as the by far best team, or best conference in the country. In fact, its non-conference performance was the best that we've ever seen with a league with that many teams. It was insane. They won almost 90% of their games collectively as a league. The Big Ten is the #2 league in the sport, in my eyes. Michigan State losing at USC helps the conference because it gives USC that much more resume heft, or would-be heft, not in the bracket just yet. But yes, it's a good league. Michigan State, Purdue, Illinois, I consider all of those teams to be Final Four contenders, and I don't think Maryland, UCLA, they're really not that far behind. Wisconsin, I want to see a little bit more of, but it is a quality league so far. And I've said this for the past couple of months. I think that the Big Ten is going to be the most compelling league race from start to finish in conference play, and we're getting more and more of that here. Michigan State losing at USC, and now, by the way, UCLA is next on the road tomorrow, could make it an even tighter race if the Spartans can't win in its road swing out to sunny LA.
All right, let's talk about UNC, because, Jerry, we talked about it. We knew that UNC going to Duke was going to be nearly an impossible task to beat them on their home court. They lose by double digits, and that gets them out of this bracket. How tough is it going to be, in your opinion, to climb back in. How tough is that path when you're looking at where UNC is at this point in the season?
Well, right now they're 13-10 overall, 1-9 in quad one games. No potential NCAA tournament team has proven more that they're not an NCAA tournament team thus far than North Carolina. The 1-9 part is going to be really difficult to overcome because they only have 2 quad one games left on the schedule at the moment at Clemson, and then the home finale with Duke. They've got a bunch of quad 2 games. Pitt's at home, which they just played them last week at Pitt and lost. So the rest of those games, they're almost must win because they can't afford any bad losses. So when you've got a whole bunch of losses to the best teams that you've played and a really bad record there, it puts a lot more pressure on the games below that group because every loss there just magnifies everything else and makes it harder to recover and just get a good enough record for the committee to even look at you. They don't have that right now.
So, Matt, you know, when you are UNC, the coach of UNC, there are high expectations. That's just what comes with the job. We're talking about Hubert Davis. He could potentially miss the tournament for twice in his last 4 seasons, or his first 4 seasons there. Do you think he's feeling the hot seat at all if they do miss the tournament? It's not that long ago we were talking about that being the preseason #1, and they missed the tournament in that same season.
Yeah, you laid it out a lot there, Jacqueline. This is year 4. Year 1 ended Coach K's career in the Final Four, won at Cameron, made the title game, had a 12, 15-point lead at halftime, and UNC couldn't hold on against Kansas, but they made the title game. Year 2, preseason #1, doesn't make the tournament. Only team that's ever been preseason #1 not to make March Madness. Last season, a 1 seed gets knocked out in the Sweet 16 by an Alabama team that makes the Final Four, and here we have a North Carolina team that was preseason top 10 and has been a bust so far this season. It has played a number of games against really good competition in dramatic fashion. I saw this team out in Maui back in November, and I thought coming out of that 3-game experience, which had its highs and its lows and its big swings, I thought UNC would stabilize itself, clearly be the #2 team in the ACC behind Duke, and get to the tournament with ease. I was wrong. Yes, in terms of his job stability, it kind of depends on how this goes. The game against Pitt and the game against Clemson that are next 2 on the schedule are pivotal for UNC to have any kind of life with its resume, as Jerry just laid out. And if UNC doesn't make the NCAA tournament, I'll repeat what I said on the Eye on College Basketball show on Sunday. I still believe that Hubert Davis is going to coach a 5th year, even if North Carolina doesn't make the NCAA tournament. But, if UNC really does have the bottom fall out, and we see a scenario in which it loses all the games to the top 5 teams in the ACC, its rematch against Duke in Chapel Hill to end the regular season doesn't go well, and that's another double-digit / blowout loss, we could have a change there. This is North Carolina. Historically, you can make a case it's the best program in the history of the sport, and this will be one of the percolating storylines in college hoops over the next 6 weeks.
Matt, Jerry, we certainly appreciate it. We knew that somebody was going to win by 20 or 30 points when it came to Florida and Tennessee, and for my sake, unfortunately, Tennessee beat them. Jerry, Matt, we certainly appreciate it. For more from Matt Norlander, you can hear him on the Eye on College Basketball podcast alongside Gary Parrish, always talking about the biggest headlines in the sport. There's a new episode in your feed right now, and it is labeled Big Pod, so there is a lot to dive into. You can download, follow, listen wherever you get your podcasts, or you can watch right now by scanning that QR code on your screen.